Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lithos. Today, my guest is Coach Jimmy House. Jimmy House is a hybrid athlete and coach specializing in sports specific strength and conditioning, mobility, flexibility, body transformations, injury prevention, powerlifting, and general fitness. Jimmy House is a current professional wrestler and a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu black belt. Coach House is a former pro natural bodybuilder and a former national and world record holder in powerlifting and strict curl. Jimmy House,
Hello,
how's it
sir.
going, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Great to see you.
Oh
It's
yeah,
been
I'm
a
ready for this
while.
first episode. Yeah, it's been a
Thank
minute.
I,
How are you doing?
I'm doing great, brother. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming
Of course.
on, and thank you for being my first guest. How was Vegas?
Congratu- Congratulations on the podcast. Yeah, Vegas was great. I, of course, was very sad to see Nick especially get injured, but obviously a lot of like technically all the people that I have coached over the last year, unfortunately went out on the first day. So that was a little bit sad to see just because I know personally firsthand the various work that they've put in to get to that point, especially over the last year. But nonetheless, getting to see people like John Carlo and Luke and Dan get on the podium and win, that was very fulfilling. And of course, being able to witness Gordon compete live is always a special occasion.
Yeah, man. I wanted, as you know, I wanted to come out there and check it out, but I just couldn't get in the cards. I've been doing a lot of stuff myself, so I see
Right.
you're working on a lot of things as well.
Yeah, man, trying to do what you're doing as well. Yeah, you know how it goes. So trying to fulfill my plate as big as I can.
It's a tough lifestyle, but it's a very rewarding one for sure.
Oh yes.
Um, all right, so let's kind of you got a whole string of people that follow you that know who you are. Let's go ahead and just introduce you real quick. Just
Absolutely.
start with you know the culture growing up for you, your background. If you want to expel upon any religious beliefs,
Mhm.
any life thoughts from Coach House, and just basically the question of who is Jimmy House.
Yes, sir. Hello, everyone. My name is Jimmy House. I am 28 years old. I'm originally from Phoenix, Arizona. I moved out here to Austin a little over a year ago. I am half Filipino, half white. With that being said, I grew up pretty cultural in the standpoint of being your typical Filipino kid growing up in a half white, half Filipino household. So, with that said, a lot of Filipino parties growing up and a lot of homework on my dad's side. So, between my dad being a psychologist growing up, going through the ringer on his various mental and physical tests, creating me to be the athlete and intellectual that I am today, as well as my mom being a star-studded saleswoman in the field of jewelry. I have tended to accumulate the best of both worlds from both my parents to create somebody that's actually really introverted, but extroverted at the right time. Also, a decent salesperson, if I say so myself, on top of somebody that's generally speaking hardworking, dedicated to his craft, an intellectual when I need to be, and somebody that very much dedicated to trying to achieve something greater with my life with the skill set given to me by my parents and God Himself. Which leads me into answering the question about religious beliefs, which very, very short, put and simple is I don't label myself in a particular religion. I very much am freely acknowledging that God is leading and guiding me throughout life and throughout my various struggles and successes. But in this point in time, I do not necessarily align with one religion over another.
Cool, cool. So you mentioned that your dad was a athlete or somebody who does exercise as well.
Mhm.
Talk about that influence and how that's shaped you to where you are today. Obviously, we know you're
Right.
all over the fitness place. So
Mhm. Yes. So when I was young, as early as 4 or 5 years old, I was very much inclined to be around my dad most of the time just because his work schedule was the most free. He only worked a couple days a week. So, with that said, in his free time, he was reading books, working at home to some degree, and then a lot of times working out in our garage gym. And so, with that said, a lot of the time that I spent with my dad early on was just sitting there, like watching him train, whether it was martial arts or lifting. As soon as I was old enough to comprehend a lot of the lifting movements that I was seeing my dad do, I gained some general curiosity towards the matter. And then at the age of 5 was like the first time he actually started teaching me how to perform a basic barbell curl, a basic shoulder press, so on and so forth. So a lot of that started at a very young age. And because of that, I kind of bit through there was initial motivation to do it because it looked fun from the outside. But then as I started doing it as a young kid, I started to realize that you needed a fair amount of dedication and a fair amount of willingness to go through hard things. And so up front, that wasn't super pleasurable to me. However, my obedience to my dad is what allowed me to kind of overcome some of those initial feelings. And then my first taste of actually enjoying the feeling of being strong came from going into middle school. So now at that point, from age 5 to like age 12, I had been lifting for about 7 years, not necessarily voluntarily, but also not necessarily forced. But then I experienced some respect for my fellow peers on my strength, my physique, and just being able to lift more than the kids in my class. And so after that, that's where I really, really got an edge for lifting. And so bleeding lifting into the various sports I was doing at the time, which included baseball, football, basketball, even in middle school, trading that into wrestling, jujitsu, powerlifting, bodybuilding, and now professional wrestling. So the lifting has always been a very strong supplement into whatever athletic endeavor that I'm pursuing. And because of the way that I started training with my dad at a young age, very much focused on being proportional in your physique, very much focused in being an athlete, and then also very much focused in being strong. That is what has kind of allowed me to have the aspects of a bodybuilder per se, but also be able to compete in powerlifting, but then also be able to athletically keep up in things such as jujitsu, amateur wrestling, and now professional wrestling.
Yes. I know you're busy. You're a busy guy, man. You do all those hats just like me, trying to do different things and stay active. Um, let's talk about you know me. I like to deep dive into things as
Hell
opposed to
yeah.
our conversations we have in class or in lifting sessions.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned, you know, while you were lifting one, you know, in school, your peers, and how describe some emotional takeaways that you have from there, as far as, was it encouraging and motivational? How did you feel? Was there any times where you felt, I have to do this, I can't not do it
Mhm.
because it'll let somebody
Right.
down? I know, you know, inspiring kids is a big thing for you, so
Totally.
kind of talk to those people out there who, when they fail, they just kind of want to give up, or
Mhm.
give them a little bit of, you know, motivation to move forward.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So for me in particular, lifting per type of school that I was in, elementary, middle school, and high school, each had a little bit different taste. Meaning, when I was in elementary school and I was already lifting, and I was lifting through the majority of elementary school, so basically through first grade and through sixth grade. And during that time, because none of my friends were lifting, some of them were obviously playing sports, but none of them were doing lifting. This is also during a time, keep in mind, where lifting itself had a bad rap for kids, where the general consensus was that if you lift at a particular age, it's going to stunt your growth, it's going to create injuries, and all that stuff that has since been scientifically disproven. And so during that time, I was aware about the stigma for youth lifting, but also knowing that I was youth lifting and around a lot of kids that obviously don't understand the science behind this, it was actually something that I hid. So for me, to this day, I don't.
Interesting.
I mean, obviously, being in my role, I don't hide my fitness passion. But also, there was a point, even for myself, dating back 20 years ago, where yeah, I actually was kind of reluctant to talk about what I did on my weekends. You know, we would come on Monday into class, and the teacher would ask the class, you know, what did you do this weekend, and blah blah blah. And one kid would have a birthday party, another kid would be playing video games, another kid would have a baseball game, and I would answer like, oh, I lifted with my dad, and then they would be like, what? What did you say? Uh, I lifted with my dad, and then I expected like this big response where they're like, "What did you say? Like you're gonna be short when you grow up." But actually, there was no initial negative comment, so I was like, "Oh, okay, that wasn't as bad as I thought." But I still actually kept it away from the majority of my friends for a long time. The only people that really knew that I lifted were my best friends, Matt and Irving, who lived in the same neighborhood as me. So, like on Saturday mornings, for example, when Irving would be riding to church, he'd always drive past my house seeing me lift with my dad. And he's like my number one reference as to like, oh, you don't believe that I've been lifting since whatever age? Is like, well, ask Irving because he saw it every single morning when we were in elementary school, you know? And Matt lived across the street. So anytime he was out playing basketball in his front porch, he would see me lifting with my dad. And so this is something that now I've been doing for over 2 decades, about 23 years. So then transitioning into middle school, I was also still under the mindset of like keeping it kind of under wraps for the most part. But then I had a cousin that I went to school with that was very much into lifting. He started getting into lifting, had like a Bowflex machine at home, and he couldn't stop talking about it. So just like in the middle of the class, he'd be like, "Jimmy, how much do you bench?" And just like in front of everybody, I'd be like, "I benched 135 last weekend." And then instead of getting ridiculed for it, I started getting respect for it, and I was like, "Oh wow, that's weird. I kind of like this." So my ego is very much fed throughout middle school that had allowed me to now take this from being something that I hid from people and didn't really have a lot of fun with, into something like, oh wow, I'm really enjoying the respect that I'm getting from my peers by doing this. And I was always eager to come into class the next week and talk about my 5 pound bench PR or whatever the case may be, and getting recognized for my physique when, generally speaking, throughout a lot of my childhood, I had some general insecurities about my physique because I wasn't necessarily super naturally lean like a lot of kids are. I wouldn't say that I was obese as a kid, but I had some general baby fat. And being somebody that looks up to pro wrestlers like Goldberg and people like that, even as a kid, you look in the mirror and I'm like, well, why don't I look like Goldberg? You know?
Yeah.
And it's just like, damn, I really need to go on a diet and work on my abs. And so, anyways, as I get into middle school and puberty starts working in my direction, that's when I started to get my first actual compliments on like my physique, and that's when another ego food was kind of fed towards me. I'm like, okay, I really enjoy this. So then now take that. I'm lifting throughout middle school. I'm playing football. I started wrestling in 8th grade, and then I bleed into high school. That's when the lifting itself started to basically become a large part of my identity. So lifting throughout high school and then wrestling throughout high school, those two things combined was basically what I was known for. And then, from high school then on, competing in powerlifting, competing in bodybuilding, being a pro wrestler, now being a lifting coach. Obviously, I've turned that initial ego boost into that secondary identity, into this now third, and my current peak of my lifting career, which is now creating an entire coaching business off of it. It's very interesting to see the progression in that. So now, to answer your original question in regards to, keeping somebody motivated or how to stay motivated and their lifting or their fitness, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's important to notate that every single person that seems to be successful or happy in their fitness or in their lifting or whatever they're doing has had some point of doubt at least once. For me, it was very early on, and now being very deep into it, actually, it occurs more than it ever has for various different reasons, such as this injury, such as what I think my body should look like or perform like. So that all never really stops. But the concept of discipline itself, in my opinion, is based off of good habits established early on and established for a long time. So if early on to me was when I was 5, 6, 7, that doesn't mean that somebody starting fitness in their 20s or 30s that they're too late to the party. But what it does mean, though, is that from the get-go, in general, you should look to establish good, healthy habits and working out and fitness and a healthy lifestyle, so that those habits carry you through doubt or insecurities or embarrassment or all these negative feelings that can be associated with the physical presence of looking a certain way to the general public. And so, for example, somebody coming in that's new, even if you don't necessarily know where to start, the beauty of the age that we live in now is that nearly everybody's a coach in lifting. So as long as you have access to somebody that generally knows what they're talking about, there's a lot of resources out there to be able to guide you in the right direction early on, whether that's an online coach, an in-person trainer, or even just from the standpoint of social media alone. Like, if my long-lasting opinion is that nowadays, if you really, really want to know or eventually evolve to get good at something, that information is so easily accessible online to where somebody could just put a year dedicated to studying legitimate YouTube videos and come out better than the majority of people pursuing master's degrees in college. And that's kind of like the sad state of where we're at, where, in my opinion, within my particular field, the education system behind exercise science or what have you, in a lot of institutions, not every single one, but a lot, is no better or to some degree behind what is accessible now, as long as you have a cell phone, an Instagram account, a YouTube account. So that's the reality of it. So now, to somebody as a beginner, there's no reason why you couldn't walk into the gym on your first day and have a better general idea than somebody would 20 years ago, and at least know in general where to start, how to perform a general exercise, how to kind of program yourself in the right direction by just watching a 60-second reel or a 10-minute YouTube video. A lot of this stuff is really easily accessible, and the only person that's really keeping you away from doing that is ourselves, is yourself. So we have
Well,
more power than what we give ourselves credit for in regards to fitness and staying motivated and starting with the right habits early on.
I 100% agree with that. And actually, my first foray into fitness, seriously, I had done some things as a child, kind of like you with my dad, but my dad was a drill instructor in the Marine Corps.
Nice.
So
Yeah,
that was a little bit different to try
I
and
bet.
work out with as a kid, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to now. It probably, it's probably more beneficial. But my first big influence, obviously, like almost everybody, was Arnold. I grew up
Uh-huh.
watching all of his movies in the 80s.
Yep.
And my first real program, I guess you would say, is I don't know if you remember, but rest in peace, Rich Piana. He had
Yep. Yep.
that series Bigger by the Day
Mm-hmm.
on YouTube, actually. Kind of funny you mentioned that. And that was my
Yep.
first program, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good information out there, also a lot of bad information. And that's why I really like the videos that you post on your socials.
Thank you.
You show some things of how to do mechanically, but you also talk about that psychology and philosophy in it. And one thing, if you don't mind me sharing, that
Mm-hmm.
you told me, I think it was day one, while we were working out, is lifting with intent. And I
Yep.
think that opened a whole new box of ideas for me in the gym.
Awesome.
So I want to thank you for that. But if you want to
Yeah.
talk
Thank
about that
you.
a little bit, go ahead.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I really appreciate that because that's something that I've been integrating in my own philosophy for myself and my training probably the last couple of years. So just to give a generally brief background on my personal lifting, like I said, I started lifting my dad at a young age. He gave me very good basics to start with, how to perform basic lifts, the concept of having a controlled eccentric, full range of motion, the proper movement pattern on a squat, bench, so on and so forth. So I had a very strong foundation. However, when my dad stopped lifting and I started taking over my own training, of course, I still try to maintain and apply a lot of those principles and concepts, but you start to get lost in the sauce a little bit when you are a 14-year-old around a bunch of other 14 to 18-year-olds that are all about how big you are, how strong you are, how much you lift, so on and so forth. So when I say get lost in the sauce, then you have your phases of getting like maxing out on bench every day or maxing out on squat
Yeah.
or whatever it is, right? Or doing lifts for what it looks like in the moment as opposed to what it does for you week to week or long term. And so for a while there, from let's say age 14, when I really really cared about having the strongest bench in my freshman class, to my senior year breaking the school squat record, to setting a handful of national and world records that have since been broken in powerlifting as a team, to then getting into the Instagram lifting scene where it's, every single 45-pound plate added to a deadlift or a squat is essentially breaking the internet. You go through these phases of not necessarily straying away from your roots, but testing the limits and getting away from general programming principles and general decisions that should be able to be made easily had your ego not been involved. And so now, if I look at those years, did I get bigger and stronger during those years? Inevitably, like the proof is in the pudding. I got stronger, I got bigger, all those great things. Did I walk the fine line of bigger, stronger, and injured quite a bit? Yes, I did. Thankfully, God willing, I was able to bypass a lot of those potential injuries I could have caused for myself. Thankfully speaking, in lifting, I've never really accumulated a serious injury, thank God. But also, that doesn't mean that more times than I care to admit, I walked that fine line and thankfully I landed on the right side. So then the last large powerlifting stint that I did, that I had squatted 717 raw for the first time. I had deadlifted
Wow.
almost 800 conventional. Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about reposting that video here in a few days just to remind people that I was once cool and lifting. But outside of that, I had my last like big stint in powerlifting where I was really, really chasing numbers hard. And I was about 240, 250 at the time. After I went for that 800 and I failed, I had ADCC East Coast trials coming up, and I knew that I needed to make under 99 if I wanted to at least give myself a chance to do anything. So I went for the 800. I got it halfway up my legs. I missed, and then I basically decided after that point, like I'm gonna need to do a complete transformation, not only of my physique short term, but also my habits long term, and even my training style. And so after that last powerlifting stint leading into East Coast trials at the time, I got my body weight down from 250 to 200 in 10 weeks. So that was a very large crash cut. That's the last time I'll ever be doing that. Since then, I've maintained my body weight between 200 and 210 for the last 2.5, 3 years. So that's been good. But as far as training goes, though, a lot more emphasis on mobility, a lot more emphasis on translating my strength into something athletic, such as jujitsu or pro wrestling, and a lot more emphasis on now the longest answer to your initial question, intent. And so, what does that mean to me? To me, it's understanding what is the exercise that you've selected to accomplish said goal. And with this particular exercise, what is the intent behind this exercise? Like, are we trying to target our triceps, our chest? Are we trying to get more explosive? Are we trying to get more mobile? Maybe a little bit of both. After you've signified what the meaning is behind an exercise in your powerlifting or your strength training program, then it comes down to now sticking with that intent, being disciplined with that intent, and never letting your form break in efforts to do more weight, last longer, do more reps, or whatever the case may be. I believe I've said this to you before. I've definitely have said it to clients more recently. In the coaching world, especially in person and online, but in person, you always get asked, like, how many reps do I do here? Or how many reps here? How many whatever? And in general, I can give an educated guess on about where we'll be, especially if we've been following for a program for X amount of time. But if it's a particular exercise, such as a pull down or a bicep curl or a pull up or what have you, I could tell you that I'm thinking that you're going to do 8 to 10 reps. But if your form is perfect and you're achieving full range of motion and you're pausing in the stretch and you're doing all these technically correct things and you end up with 6, well, as a coach and as a person that's trying to get bigger and stronger, I'd rather take that perfect 6 than a messy 8. So
Mhm.
8 reps on paper doesn't equate the same to one individual over another. It all depends on the execution of the exercise and the intent behind the exercise. Certain exercise you can alter a certain way to hit a muscle group a little differently, or focus on mobility a little bit more than strength, or vice versa. And it's really all dependent on the athlete and then the coach
Yeah.
that's prescribing the exercise. So really, anytime you're going into the gym, it could be something as basic as a bicep curl. Okay, if it's a bicep curl, then obviously we don't want to integrate pecs, shoulders, momentum, all these things that you see people do on a daily basis anytime you walk into the gym. If we're truly trying to strengthen our bicep, make our bicep bigger, or even make it more durable, then we want to make sure that the bicep itself is getting 100% of that work. And then the bicep itself should be the limiting factor in what causes failure at a certain point of the set. So
Yeah.
the target muscle is the bicep. If you fail at a certain point of the set, it should be because the bicep gives out, as opposed to your lower back being tired because you're swinging the weight, or you're out of breath because you're moving the weight so fast you can't slow down, or all those various factors that really shouldn't be a thing, especially when you're trying to do an isolated bicep curl or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah. I know my first couple of sessions with you, I was feeling that lactic acid build up and just fatiguing so fast because it was the correct way to lift versus what I had been doing for many years of just, I don't want to call, I don't want to make fun of anybody who's trying to do progress, but we all start somewhere.
Yeah.
But I now, after training with you for so long, and I go into the gym and I see people and they're doing reps to do reps and they're doing them so fast, barely going down. And I'm just, I want to say something to them, but again, we all have a journey.
Yep.
Obviously, if I see something that's unsafe, I want to, hey, don't do
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
uh, we we all got to get that knowledge by seeking it out. Otherwise, you're not receptive to it and you won't take it in anyway. You mentioned at the beginning here when you were talking about that particular piece, going to trials and lifting. Can you articulate a little bit about your philosophy as far as bodybuilding style exercises for jiu-jitsu athletes? Obviously, in the professional wrestling world, most of us growing up watching wrestling, they were all big jacked, bodybuilder dudes who would wrestle. That's kind of changing a little bit. I still like the big dudes myself, but I also enjoy the high flyers. But in jiu-jitsu, primarily it's always been you don't need muscle or strength, you just use technique. But as we know, and as people are starting to see, the better athlete you are, the better your skills come through and help you.
Yes. So I actually think that bodybuilding training, if done correctly, is actually a really good training methodology for jiu-jitsu, because you're constantly training eccentric. Again, like I said, if you're doing it correctly, there's some people out there that call themselves bodybuilders that, again, just, half rep, use momentum, and all these various things. So not necessarily that style, but the style that includes, again, a slow eccentric, controlling the weight as your muscle is lengthening, loading your muscle in a stretch position. That's a great way to maintain and improve upon a general baseline of mobility also. And then implementing a fast or explosive concentric, obviously with the intent of the exercise in mind. So I actually think that bodybuilding is great, because as long as you're doing it properly, then you can assume that you're giving all your muscles relatively equal attention. You're taking them, again, through a proper slow eccentric, a good pause in a stretch position, and then a relatively under control but explosive concentric, which all these things have a role in jiu-jitsu. The only thing that would be beneficial outside of that isn't necessarily bodybuilding training would be isometric. So whether it's yielding or overcoming isometrics, yielding would be, holding a split squat halfway down and just timing yourself under load. That would be an example of yielding. So you're coming to a stop. Overcoming would be the concept of trying to lift through an immovable object or force or whatever. So for example, you see people, will practice their squeeze by squeezing a med ball or something like that. Or some people might deadlift underneath a rack with the intent of putting as much force into it, knowing that they're never actually going to lift the bolts out of the rack itself. Like that would be overcoming isometrics. So overcoming isometrics and yielding, those are all great things to add in. And then, outside of that, I always like to sprinkle in the various athletic style movements, things that are requiring you to move quickly and explosively laterally, forward, backwards, things that are all going to be implemented in jiu-jitsu as well. And then on top of that, sprinkle your handful of specific mobility exercises. So bodybuilding itself for jiu-jitsu covers quite a bit. Now, then a lot of times you hear the argument of, well, if you're training like a bodybuilder for jiu-jitsu, that would be counterproductive, because then you're going to get stiff, you're going to get too big, you're going to get immobile, all these various arguments that come up. And getting too big a lot of times is just the concept of how many drugs are you on. So if you're getting too big, training like a bodybuilder and do jiu-jitsu, maybe lighten up on the drugs a little bit. That's number one. Or just eat at a maintenance calorie range so that you're putting on mostly strength as opposed to an excess amount of muscle. But in regards to the mobility, like I said, if you're training bodybuilding movements in a full range of motion, you're guaranteed to maintain a particular baseline of mobility, which is better than most. Then, like I said, there's nothing that says in a bodybuilding program you can't put particular mobility movements in that are going to allow you to be strong in long ranges of motion and compromise ranges of motion that we see commonly in jiu-jitsu. What people don't realize is that in a good bodybuilding program, you should have mobility exercises, because when it comes to posing, there is a fair amount of mobility that a lot of the best posers in the world actually exemplify. Because in order to flare out your lats, your shoulders need to be able to bend in a particular way. Or, for example, the classic like Shawn Michaels pose that people do in bodybuilding, that's a fair amount of lower body mobility. So there's actually, and Kai Green's a good example. He had great mobility. And if you look at any of his posing routines, he exemplifies that. So bodybuilding doesn't make you stiff, but most people that train bodybuilding just don't do mobility or don't train in the full range of motion. So then in result, they become stiff because they never let their body know that we need access to these ranges of motion. So then they just like stiffen up because their body is so used to moving within a finite range. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of negative stigma behind bodybuilding for jujitsu, but to me, it's actually really great training methodology for it. And for me, I've obviously included elements of powerlifting in there, elements of mobility, elements of just general athletic training. The only one of the few things I really attest against is when people get really, really sports specific. So a lot of jujitsu coaches out there like to think that they have come up with the next best thing by, putting a band on a rack and like practicing weighted arm drags or whatever. Nick and I like to joke about that. I don't find much viability in that simply because whatever gain that there is to gain from that, it covers so little that in regards to maximizing your time and for a jiu-jitsu practitioner or competitor, assuming that lifting is secondary to your primary jiu-jitsu training, you need to maximize that hour to 90 minutes 2 to 3 times a week that you're investing in. And in order to do that, to me, you got to pick exercises or movements that are going to cover a lot in a short period of time so that you can get back to resting for jujitsu practice or just recovering in general.
Yes. So you mentioned training with a lot of the new wave guys leading up to the ADCC. I know you've trained with Nicholas Marangali, Giancarlo Biodoni, Satoshi Ishii, I believe, trains with you sometimes. Let's, if you don't mind and you want to share, talk about how you approached that, their sessions. I know you can't give away what they do, but
Right.
you knowing what they have to prepare for and, doing it yourself. So you have a good understanding of that, but everybody's body type's different. I know, Marangali's closer to my height, I believe, right? He's a taller guy.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting for him because he's the world's best hybrid jiu-jitsu athlete, right? He goes from gi to no gi. Just kind of with what you were just telling us about the modalities of it, how do you approach, as far as coming up with the plan, executing that plan? If they come back to you and say, hey, I just rolled for an hour and this wasn't firing or this was great, because I know for me, I haven't trained since I tore my triceps, but since I've been working with you, I'm ready to get back in there and see the mobility that I have, the strength, and also the endurance of that muscle. So just kind of elaborate on that a little bit, if you will.
Yeah, so to cover, I've been working with Nick for over a year. I worked with Satoshi leading into his last MMA fight, but I don't currently work with him. I worked with Dorian Oliveris leading into ADCC, the 18-year-old phenom that trains with New Wave, and then I worked with Hillbilly Hammer online, and then I worked with Margot Cicerelli from California. I forgot which school she's from, to be quite honest with you, but I know she trained at B Team when she was in Austin. So those were the main people that I worked with leading into this ADCC. Giancarlo, we worked out together, but I didn't coach him.
Okay.
So to answer your question, you're right. With high level jiu-jitsu athletes and commonly just regular jiu-jitsu practitioners, the likelihood of them coming into a session and say, hey, this hurts, or hey, this doesn't feel right, oh, I'm tired of this, whatever, some sort of audible being called is more common than what I would have expected coming into this career path. So with that said, I have my general idea of what we're going to pursue during the course of a program leading into a competition. However, at any given point, I have to be ready to call a stop, call an audible, have an option ready if a particular joint is injured, a particular muscle is tired, or whatever the case may be. Or, yeah, because you just can't anticipate. Some practice days for them might be relatively easy, depending upon who they train with. Some days might be randomly hard, depending upon who they train with. And depending upon what they're doing outside of the training and outside of the lifting, these are all things that play a role with how they show up to me when they come to lift. So with Nick, a lot of the things that I keep in mind when I'm training jujitsu athletes is like what motivates them to go to the gym? What do they like about lifting? That plays a big role to me because I would rather base a program around what somebody really likes doing and then have specific exercises in there to then give them more specifically what they want to accomplish on the mat. But
Mm.
sometimes, for example, I personally like to be much more collaborative with my coaching, especially when it comes to the high level guys, because the high level guys, such as a Nick, such as a Satoshi, such as a Dorian, these guys, I'm not the first person that they've trained with. I'm not the first time that they're lifting. They have a general idea of what they like, what works well for them, and what's going to keep them motivated to continue to show up.
Yeah.
A lot of times with coaches in this field, they drink their own Kool-Aid a little bit too much and they stick strongly to what they believe to be the best. Where I try to come from the standpoint of I have a good idea of what we need to excel in jiu-jitsu. That's isometric strength, concentric, eccentric strength, good conditioning, good athleticism, good mobility. But one person could really enjoy deadlifting and the other person can just be like, I just don't care for deadlifting. And I can still get that same goal of being as capable of a jiu-jitsu athlete as we can. One person likes to prioritize deadlifts every week, one person doesn't. Nick, for example, loves deadlifting, loves squat, loves bench. Do I think that he needs deadlift, squat, and bench to be on his level? Absolutely not. However, by utilizing those specific exercises properly and strategically over the last year and a half or so, he's added a ton of strength, specifically going from 365 for a couple on deadlift in our first month of working together to deadlifting 500 with probably 20, 25 pounds in the tank about 2 months before ADCC. So
Nice.
obviously with results like that, there's no argument in regards to his strength improving. The biggest takeaway of it all is like, okay, obviously his recent shoulder injury doesn't have anything to do with this, but he got to that point without getting injured with basically, for the most part, only receiving the positive return on investment from deadlifting consistently that you would hope to gain, as opposed to back issues, excessive central nervous system fatigue, like those things that you generally want to avoid if you are deadlifting. But again, that's because Nick likes it. But after we get through those, it's a lot of unilateral work, working one side of the body, a lot of lateral stability type stuff, a lot of bodybuilding movements. He also wants to build his physique. It's a good way to build his brand. So you have all these little mini goals in mind. And then you have mobility, durability, general conditioning, stuff like that. So I like to prioritize what somebody likes as long as it's within reason. If somebody came to me and said, I have ADCC in a month, but my goal is to beat my deadlift PR the week before, I would probably try to find a way to go back and forth with a person and try to find a happy median between maxing out on deadlift 7 days on the ADCC and you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
it's it's collaborative, and I think that's why a lot of the athletes enjoy working with me because they're able to do the things they like doing in the gym, learn some new stuff, and then give new things to try to add to their repertoire of what they actually know to work for them as individuals. And I've always said this in coaching is at the very, very least, my job is to deliver the tools to the client that allows them to feel comfortable going off on their own and training themselves or with whoever else they work with and to gain something from me, whether that's 1 month working together, a year, 2 years. The base is what I stand on. It doesn't necessarily matter. But that's why I charge a particular rate or I give a particular amount of effort to the clients because it's less about just me being there to tell you to do deadlifts for 5 sets of 3. It's more so about like we're doing deadlifting because this applies to this, or we're doing this mobility exercise because this matters for this, and so on and so forth. I'm very much about educating over just instructing because my value comes so much more than just being able to show up as a trainer and just kind of take people through movements. That's where
Yeah.
I really admire somebody like John because his ability to break down technique on a philosophical level is unlike anything the world has ever seen. And so seeing John teach jujitsu in the way he does holds me to a higher standard when I'm trying to teach lifting to people at a very similar standard, or at a standard that I'm striving to get to, you know? So it's hard to learn from somebody like John and then be in a teaching role myself, and to give any less of what I see him give his
Yeah.
students, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I started training with John, um, I was blown away by, there's lots of great teachers and athletes in the sport.
Mm-hmm.
But the way John approaches it just made a lot of sense to me, because it was a logical
Right.
next progression. It wasn't just here's a couple moves. If the person does this, you try this one. He walks you through so many different um I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this. It's just so cerebral, I guess would be a
Yeah.
great way to say that. Okay, let's talk about that a little bit. So that's how I actually came to know you. Some of my fellow students, the freshman New Wave Henzo students under John.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Shout out Liam if you're
Oh
watching
yeah.
at some point. So how is it? How did you connect with the New Wave guys? And then, if you want to give us a little bit of insight of how fun or how grueling the training is rolling with those guys,
Yeah.
just give us that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a it's a relatively long journey, or longer than like you would think. It's funny how it all came about. So the first West Coast trials that I did back in 2019, it was at Muscle Farm headquarters in Burbank, California. And Gordon was injured at the time, so he was in a brace walking around. And this was when like his brother Nicky Ryan was really like coming onto the scene. At the time, I was competing at heavyweight, and CT Fletcher actually came to watch me compete. And so CT was hanging out with me while I was waiting for my first match, which took forever. This was like while ADCC trials was still collectively kind of small and could be done in a single day, too,
Yeah.
mind you. But anyway, so CT and I are hanging out, and CT is very new to jiu-jitsu at this point. He doesn't really know who anyone is, but he's really just there to show his support towards me, which was a huge honor in itself. But
Does he train?
no, he had done martial arts like karate, I
Okay.
think, I believe, and did stuff in the military, but he's never formally trained jujitsu or anything like that, I don't think. But
Okay.
he now enjoys it very much, respects it, and obviously is now a fan of Gordon, and I take credit for that, because as I'm hanging out with CT, Gordon, who was probably a couple years into his lifting progress at the time, was fans of like your traditional like CT Fletchers and Flex Lewis, and Ronnie Coleman, I'm sure, is in there. So when he saw CT Fletcher, Gordon Ryan of all people came up to CT and was like, hey, I'm a big fan of you, blah blah blah. And I was like right in the middle of this. I'm like, CT, this is like the goat of jiu-jitsu. Like this is the best jiu-jitsu practitioner in the world. And I
Yeah.
made that intro, and they talked for a while, and ever since then, Gordon had known who I was through that. And Flow Grappling, I did a podcast shortly after that with CT, and Gordon had given me a shout out, and I thought that was pretty cool. But that's where Gordon made the initial intro to me. He followed me on Instagram that day. It was all a really cool experience. So then fast forward a couple years, when I was looking for the next best place to relocate in order to continue pursuing my goals and dreams, I took a trip to Austin, and when I was there, I really wanted to maximize it. So I went to visit Goldberg. I went to do the best jujitsu that I could. I really wanted to see what was out here, and if I could really see myself living here for the next however many years. And so I knew Henzo Gracie existed, obviously, and I knew that New Wave trained at a separate facility, but I wasn't necessarily sure how it worked getting into that. Obviously, now knowing what I know now, it's actually quite hard to get invited to Roca to train. Like you have to be not only high level, but very trusted, very safe, and
Yeah.
just fit into the general vibe. Which I'll go out on a limb to say, especially in the weather storm that we're seeing now, New Wave, when I first went there, was a extremely pleasant experience, and there's a reason why I've chosen to stick with them and support them to my best ability over the last couple of years, is because my first experience training at Roca with Gordon and John and Nick and Luke and Dan and John Carlo and all those guys was so shockingly pleasant and positive and welcoming when they didn't owe me fuck all shit. Like they didn't owe me anything. I was just a visitor that on a whim messaged Gordon to do a private lesson with me. And they're in ADCC camp at the time. So he said, I'm not doing privates right now, but if you want to come train, feel free to come. So he invited me to the Roca session. And then the rest is
Cool.
kind of history from there. Yeah. So that allowed me to obviously see Gordon again, show John and everybody that I'm a safe training partner, that I'm at least skilled enough to be a training dummy in there, right? And then meet Nick. I remember Nick and I's first round was awesome. I rolled with Luke that day. I rolled with Dan. And I was able to make some internet friendships with them that lasted from the time I went back all the way to the time where I decided to move. And I remember when I first moved to Austin, I was basically a week out of being ready to do jiu-jitsu from my last knee injury prior to this one. And I hadn't trained jiu-jitsu in 7 months, but I knew that I needed to act fast and try to cultivate the relationships with the guys at New Wave as best as I could in order to get in this room that's so highly accredited and well respected. So,
Yeah.
you know, I literally also on a whim just like asked, like hit Dan up and just said I'm like in town, and then he like literally just texted me like, come to practice now. I'm like, yes sir. So I just go straight there, and I didn't have a home here yet. We were still Airbnb looking for places to stay. And again, like I said, hadn't trained jiu-jitsu a month, but Dan told me to come down, so I just went down, and thankfully was welcome back. And again, the rest is kind of history in regards to the relationships that I've built with all the top guys there. I now call them great friends. I'm very, very honored to be able to like actually cheer them on and support them, because I know that they're not only great jiu-jitsu athletes, but also great human beings as well, despite what
Yeah.
the jiu-jitsu cults out there want to put out online, you know, and you know, because you've met a lot of these people. So yeah, man, it's crazy how these things work, but it's put me in a position to be able to train with the best in the world, be able to call the best in the world my friends, be able to coach the best in the world in lifting. I didn't come to Austin with this idea that I was going to be, you know, the jiu-jitsu coach around here for strength training, but very honored to have kind of fallen into that title for sure. I have New Wave, I have
Beautiful.
Renzo Gracie Austin to thank for that. So, you know, that's the general story of how I got into New Wave. When I say that, I'm not claiming to be anywhere on these guys' level. I'm not claiming to even deserve to be there. I'm not claiming any of these things. All I'm saying is that by the grace of God, I was lucky enough to get an invite, and I proved myself to be a safe training partner and a good training dummy. And because of that, I've been able to make some really cool friendships from being exposed to these high level individuals.
Amen. And I completely relate with that, because when I moved here, I actually didn't know anybody. And I didn't, there was where I live about 30-45 minutes away from Austin. So where I
Gotcha.
live, there was one jiu-jitsu school, and it was like another 30 minutes away from here. So
Right.
I'm just kind of,
Yeah.
at least what I knew at the time. So,
Mhm.
and then
Oh, really?
eventually I was able to move that into a school of my own.
Okay.
But when everybody left New York to move here, I just, I was on a crossroads of, do I want to invest everything I have to make this school work? Because we've been going for 2 years at that point. And I wasn't unhappy with where I was. I felt it was very successful, especially when I started. We started right in the storm of COVID. So it
Right.
was a
Right.
terrible time to start a new
Yeah.
business. And so when everybody got here, I just thought, what an amazing godsend, what an opportunity. If you can get that opportunity, you'd kind of be missing something to turn it down,
Yeah.
So
Right.
I came, I made that tough decision, and I don't regret it at all, because like you said, Dan is huge. He's the jiu-jitsu giant for a reason, and
Yep.
he's
Yep.
very, very um unique with his personality, because he's a really nice guy,
Yep.
really humble. I always tell you, you're one of the best human beings I've ever met.
Thank you.
Same with Dan. you know
Yeah, for sure.
um, and most of the, I don't know everybody, but everybody that I've met has been that
Yeah.
same way. Who doesn't love great meat? Click the link down below and visit Good Ranchers today. I have been using that service for over a year now, and I get great tasting meat delivered to my door every single month. I myself personally use the Ranchers Classic, but you can explore all of their options by clicking the link below and visiting Good Ranchers today. Okay, let's talk about friends and support system, because obviously doing professional wrestling, looking at acting, doing the bodybuilding, doing jiu-jitsu, running the business, that takes a very strong support system. And I know you are very inner circle, family friendly. Everybody's working to help support. If you want to talk about that a little bit, talk about, whatever you want to talk about, but I know you got a really good support system there. So
Yes, I do. Yeah. So, coming to Austin, it was just me and my best friend slash little brother Matt, and we had just up and out of Arizona with nothing but faith and believing of what we want to do in order to make it. And so, because of that journey, specifically 14 hours from Arizona to here, because of that journey in itself, he and I have developed an even stronger bond than what I ever thought possible. Because I've known Matt actually since I was 6 when he first moved here from Japan. And so you've met Matt. He's my personal business manager and assistant now. So
yeah,
being able to take a 22-year friendship and then turn it into something to where now we never have to not be friends because now we're working for each other. And for the most part, it's a relatively healthy relationship outside of the times that I ridicule him for various different things. So, so all in all, it's a really cool position to be in there. And then outside of that, my two other best friends, Irving and Jacob, have since moved to Austin as well. And Irving I've known also since I was sick. He grew up six. He grew up in the same neighborhood as I. And Jacob, we wrestled in high school together. So we've all known and been around each other for at least a decade, if not two. And them being able to sacrifice what they're comfortable with in Arizona, what they know in Arizona, their family, their friends, to be able to put enough faith into my particular business vision and life goal to move out here, relocate, and put themselves in the right places in order to make this dream happen. There's very few instances that I've ever heard about, and I would be willing to say there's very few instances, period, where a group of friends that has lasted a couple decades not only sticks together as friends, but are able to relocate states, start a business, stick together, be successful, prove people wrong, and be able to take something that was nothing more than just a bunch of 20-year-olds lifting together into something that now is creating income more than I ever thought possible with this lifting stuff. So that's great. On top
that's
of that,
beautiful.
thank you. On top of that, since moving to Austin, you know, whether I guess I'll save my romantic for last. So the next thing that I would give credit to would be my overall support system through my clients. My clients make it possible to chase my dreams as a pro wrestler, as an actor, as somebody that wants to be a superhero to millions of kids. Because if it wasn't for my client base believing in me and believing in my coaching as much as they do, I would be at a 9 to 5 having to spend hours there when I should be working on my craft or chasing my dreams or doing all these various things that are necessary in order to reach a higher level. So if it wasn't for my clients supporting me in my business, and thank God they feel like they're getting something out of it, but it wasn't for them, I would also not be able to do this. I would be struggling to find some shitty job with my business degree that I never planned to use, right? And
Yeah.
so very grateful to have people like you that believe in me enough in their training and in their particular goals to then help support me and give me the time that I need necessary to continue to chase my particular dream. So that's a huge, huge thank you.
You're too
My
kind,
parents
brother. I
back,
appreciate that.
of course, I appreciate you guys. My parents back home play a huge role in being able to support me long enough to be able to figure out that I want to create a coaching business, that I want to pursue this dream of being a professional wrestler, that I want to pursue this dream of impacting kids, and not forcing me out of the house when I was 18, and not forcing me to use my degree, and not forcing me to get a job, and all these things that you typically run into as just a typical 18, 19, 20-year-old kid exiting high school. Your parents force you to go get a real job and do big boy things, and thankfully speaking, my parents just let me work jiu-jitsu full time and let me train and work out. So that
Yeah.
in itself is a privilege, and I try to make the most out of that, because there's a lot of people that do get opportunities such as that, but I don't personally think that they see all the way through. But considering the fact that I was very privileged in that sense, I wanted to make sure that I made the most out of it. And now being able to pay not only my income, but my best friend's income, I think I've done pretty well with that particular privilege.
For
So, and
sure.
then last but definitely not least, after moving to Austin as well, back in September, I met the current love of my life and the person that I plan to marry at some point in the near future. So I can't talk too much there. But Claire Bays has been an amazing support system, especially on the emotional side of things, especially in the most recent months with this knee injury and the various fears and doubts that come with that. So she's been an amazing support system for me that's kept my head on straight during this awkward time in my journey. This awkward chapter that I'm just kind of as patient as I can, waiting to be able to show what I'm meant to do. So she's been amazing there. She loves me better than ever. Been loved before. I try to show up better for her than I ever had before. I'm imperfect at it, but she believes in me and sticks with me through it all. So I'm very grateful to have, finally a beautiful woman that has strong morals, that stands on the grounds of work ethic and discipline and respect and kindness, to not only model myself after, but to also be extremely proud to be with, and also just continue to strive as a team to our greater good, our greater selves, and try to reach our individual goals together. So yeah, the support system that I have here, as well as everybody else that supports me all around the world, is something that I'm very, very lucky to have. And I never necessarily thought I'd be in a position to talk about all these things, but very humbled and grateful that I am able to. So thank you for that time.
Absolutely, brother. If you want to give a shout out, I know she's also a personal trainer, right?
Mhm.
Here in
Yeah, so
Austin.
she trains out of On It Gym in South Austin. So she specializes in pain pain free strength and conditioning. She is a CrossFit athlete. She does Olympic weightlifting. She has a lot of knowledge, and now accumulating even more on the bodybuilding side of things since working out with me, to where she's amazing at training actually quite a few males. Actually, there's a lot of males that actually trust her with their training, which is something that I've never really seen from a female trainer, even dating back to my time in Arizona. So that's very unique. She's amazing with women. She has a ton of women online that look to her for the the stuff that's outside of just what's the workout for today or what am I eating for today. She's
Sure.
I always tell her she's a better coach than me, because she spends so much time with each individual client that she has, and checks how their day is doing. What personal issues are you dealing with that are preventing you from reaching your health and wellness goals. She puts a lot of time into her craft, and I'm very excited to see the point to where the entire world can see how much she cares, because you know I like to think that I care a lot in my job, but she is always a humble reminder that I could care a little bit more.
Yeah. And she has a podcast as well, right? If you want to
Correct.
pitch that a little bit, go ahead.
Yeah. It's called Conversations with Claire. I've been on there 3 times. One before we were dating, one shortly after we started, and then one more recently. And then
Beautiful.
she's had
Beautiful.
a bunch of other very well-known people, and actually not just fitness, and a lot of different fields on there as well. So a lot of people with a lot of really good perspectives she has on.
When's the Coach House podcast coming out?
So that would be up to Matt. I've been telling my guys to start this podcast for the last year or so and a half, and so it seems as though we are about to start that hopefully within the next month, because we're transitioning into a bigger coaching platform. So with that, I plan to launch a handful of different new things, and the podcast is definitely going to be part of that for sure. So I'd like to tell you that's going to happen within the next month, our first episode. So
I did not even know that, so that is amazing. I can't wait for that. That's awesome.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I won't be as good of
um,
a host as you, but I'll try.
oh, brother, you got all the charisma and all the charm, bro. You're be way better than
Thanks.
me.
Oh no, thank you, man.
um, let's move on because we've talked a lot about jujitsu, and obviously we both train, so it's a big part of our lives. But for the people who are professional wrestling fans that kind of tune in to see what we have to say, let's
Yep.
uh let's talk about something I think just from speaking with you, I know is a big moment in your life. And actually, you brought me to tears, good tears, joyful tears, in a training session telling me this story. So if you want to share it to the world,
Yeah.
I'm starting to tear up again, man. I'm getting
Thanks,
emotional
man.
just thinking about it because it's
Thank you.
so powerful.
Thank
Let's
you.
talk about your connection, your relationship, and where it started to how you met Goldberg, and talk about what that really means to you.
Yeah. So I've said this enough times to where most people that follow me generally know how it all kind of began. Goldberg was the first and most impactful figure, quote unquote, fictional figure to me since I was a kid, as early as 3 years old. That's when the height of the Monday Night Wars was going on between WCW and WWF at the time.
Yep.
And professional wrestling wasn't always as PG as it is today in regards to the different things that were said or done. And so my parents, me being an only child, my parents were very protective over me. So they were very selective in what I was allowed to watch on TV. And pro wrestling had a good amount of different things that they didn't want me to view as a 3 year old. But,
For sure.
you know, and this is where it's so interesting how things line up this way, because they could have just said, don't watch wrestling altogether, right? You know, just make it easy, don't watch wrestling at all, stick to Rugrats and Arthur and call it good. But they let me tune in specifically to Goldberg, of all people. And it soon got to the point where he was the only one that I really cared to watch. And to be quite honest, for the majority of my adult life, that has also been the case. I probably would catch flack as a pro wrestler now saying that, but you know, I had stopped wrestling. The only person really that has really motivated me to watch wrestling outside of Goldberg is John Cena. In the earlier 2000s when he was first making his big run, because I also think he's uh, as inspirational as and almost as heroic of a figure as Goldberg is. I just was impacted by Goldberg at such a young age. He was my guy, you know. But anyways, but the thing is with that is, even when he came back the second time in 2016, I hadn't watched wrestling in years. I barely knew who anyone was. And as soon as Goldberg made his announcement he was coming back, all of a sudden I know about every single storyline, every single person, because Goldberg's involved. So now I care all of a sudden again, you know?
Yeah.
And even in 2016, that was a few years before I actually got to meet him in person. So regardless of my association with him, whether or not I ever actually got to meet him, he would still be the sole standing character that is essentially paved the way for me to find what my purpose is in life and be a long lasting role model and how I think is a good way and the proper way to get there through humility, hard work, being disciplined, being a good listener, being somebody that treats people how you want to be treated, all these various things and traits that he has that he displays to me now as a friend, to where it doesn't matter how successful I may or may not get. I know that there always has to be an element of humility and appreciation and a respect, because if Goldberg's got to where he is in that manner, then there's no excuse for me to fall under that bar. So, you know, as I'm watching this as a kid, it's just you see this figure with huge traps and amazing physique, athletic as all hell, intense as all hell, and then after the match has a heart to pick the kid up on his shoulders and do all these things. So it's just like, how could somebody master all of these different traits? And you know, you can say whatever you want about the wrestling and entering ability, but the fact of the matter is, to walk into professional wrestling and to be able to captivate an entire audience, to make people think that wrestling is real, that's something that only a handful of people have ever really been able to do. So regardless of what he's quote able to do in the ring and all the various stories that are out there, what you can't deny is how he was able to captivate an audience by essentially amplifying who he is as a human being, which is an extremely kind-hearted person, an extremely intense person, an amazing athlete, and somebody that truly gives a shit about the people that support him. And those are the pillars of life that I've tried to stand on ever since I was a kid. And regardless of whatever I get to do in life, those are what I always try to fall back on, because between my dad and Goldberg, these are like the two male figures in my life that are very similar actually. And because I've been following them forever, I have no reason to fall anywhere short of that standard that they've set. So, you know, if you fast forward through all of that, now all of a sudden this figure that my life is kind of essentially based around, not in a worshiping kind of way, but more so in a constant subconscious kind of way. You know, in
Sure.
lifting, if you ever see me in the gym, you see me with Goldberg mannerisms, whether it's like shaking my head or doing one of those, or like before a set, just like really like about to walk out of the tunnel and get hit with all the fireworks and explode. You know, if I hit a PR back in the day, it'd be the equivalent of him hitting a PR on Hogan and just erupting for the crowd. I've done that so many times in my imagination and now in my own personal life, to where I've just like embodied that of which I believe to be Goldberg, and that's just how much belief that I had in what he stood for at the time, and how it's paved the way to live my life a certain way, but to also manifest the opportunity and privilege to be able to meet him. Number one, be able to train his son, be able to be welcomed into his home, and to be able to actually call him. I like to call him my Texas dad, but at the very least, call him a friend. And
Yeah.
that's something where it took me the first 4 or 5 occasions to get through, to actually stop crying after every single one of them. You know, there's one video on my YouTube of the first day that I met him, and I break down into tears right in front of him. There's another occasion where he got me tickets to SmackDown, and after he comes out of the entrance, and after he spirits the Fiend, rest his soul, he comes back out to give me a hug, and it was like, honestly, to this day, the best day of my life, when he came out in front of the entire SmackDown audience, gave me a hug, and went back to the locker room. Like, he had Spear the Fiend, went off. As soon as they went to commercial, he made his way back, and then the entire audience is zoomed in on him because they think he's going to come back to do something, and then he just came
Yeah.
back to give me a hug and walk back to the locker room. That was you know that, that's where I truly gained the belief in myself, and the belief in my goals and my vision and my purpose. Because if if somehow, some way, I was able to manifest that sitting at home in Glendale, Arizona, as Goldberg's impacting the entire wrestling universe with his with his run, and able to manifest, I had a lot of envy over the kids that he would go up to, give a hug, and put on his shoulders when I was also their age.
Yeah.
But then to be able to manifest, basically experiencing that as a 22 or 23-year old, and feel that same way, like, it was, because at a certain point you think he's not coming back to wrestling, and that's a cool thought to have, but that's never going to happen. But
Yeah.
somehow, some way, God willing, I manifested that opportunity, because God has set that path for me, and I had manifested this since I was a kid, being able to meet Goldberg.
Yeah.
That just doesn't it just doesn't happen. I've never heard of things like this happening, and so because of that, I ignorantly pursue my dreams and my goals and my passion. I work so goddamn hard, because if I can meet Goldberg after being a fan of him for 20 years, then I can do anything. Not because
Yeah.
I'm this special human being, but for some odd reason I can just speak things into existence. So I'm just going to ignorantly carry that superpower into my own greatness. And I wouldn't have that ability had it not been for Goldberg seeing who I was, being able to see that I was more than just your regular fan, and believe in me as a person, and be able to trust me with the things that he's trusted me with. It's my duty, and my job, my responsibility, to be able to carry the torch, as he said, and be able to pass that off. And while I carry the torch, be able to impact the next Jimmy House and the millions more that surround that. And the only thing that stops me from doing that is death, because there's nothing more that I want to do than to be able to meet a Jimmy House one day, and be able to guide him in the same direction that Goldberg has guided me.
That's beautiful, man. I'm telling you, you've seen me break down in tears while we were at the gym when you were telling me this story, but such an incredible, extraordinary story. You're such
Thank
an
you.
incredible person. That's why I wanted to do this with you first. And
Thank you.
it sounds like Goldberg's also a very exceptional person. So
Oh yeah.
uh, let's talk about how did you come to meet him, as
Hmm.
far as having that personal relationship? If you can share
Yep.
share
Absolutely.
whatever you want to share about that.
And that's also thanks to CT too. So my relationship with New Wave is thanks to CT, and my relationship with Goldberg is also thanks to CT. When I first became friends with CT after doing a couple of his lifting events, I got to have a more personal relationship with him. And one of the first things that I got to say to him once I had become friends with him was, I think it's the coolest thing in the world that you're friends with Goldberg. Like he's been my childhood hero since I can remember. It's just the coolest thing that you know him, number one, and that he's an actual friend of yours. And now come to learn that CT is actually a mentor to Goldberg. Not a lot of people know that, but CT is one of the few people that
Wow.
Goldberg will call up for advice or mental prep or whatever. Goldberg looks up very, very much so to CT. So after that, it was me actually tagging Goldberg in a couple lifting videos with his baseball tee on, specifically one of those also at CT's event. And then shortly after that, he had followed me on Instagram, messaged me personally, sent me this huge care package of just all this Goldberg memorabilia. It was the craziest thing. It was just, again, like there's so many small stories behind the bigger picture of what I'm trying to say here, but there's so many things that happen. I mean, I say the one thing was the best day of my life, but also the day where I see Goldberg followed you was also quite a great day in my life. At
Sure.
least top five. And I messaged CT shortly after that, kind of thanking him for the opportunity to even like have that happen to me. And I was very much content with just obviously just the follow or just him replying to my Twitter post, let alone messaging me, let alone sending me things, let alone again where we're at now. And CT had sent me a message saying that, yeah, Goldberg actually asked me about you the other day. Like, tell me about this Jimmy House kid.
Nice.
It's yeah, exactly. And to think that my childhood hero had this conversation about me prior to knowing me, that's when I just like, this is crazy. There's no way this is actually happening. Like, how did I fall upon this? And CT just gave him just the utmost positive sales pitch on me, basically, that
Beautiful.
had allowed him to see that, yeah, like this kid really loves you. He's been a fan of you for a long time. He himself has been a very special person to me, and he just basically kind of gave that nod of approval, essentially, right? And now knowing that CT is a mentor to Bill, it makes much more sense as to why my friendship with Goldberg grew a lot more after that conversation between the two. So between CT and Goldberg, I can't thank them enough, and I can only ever strive to repay them for everything that they've done to me. And to me, the best way to repay them is to continue chasing my dreams and do as like what Goldberg said, like carry the torch. He
Yeah.
knows what I want to do with my life, and I know that when I get to that point, he's gonna know that he had the biggest hand in that, and it'll be a beautiful moment once I can get there and show him that everything that he did in his own career had much deeper meaning than what he even realized at the time. Of
That's powerful, man. Thank you for sharing that.
course.
It's one of those stories that I'm telling you, you could write a book or a special, a TV
Yeah.
special or a movie, because those are things that so many people don't ever get to experience, and it's just one after the other. It's just a beautiful story. And like you said,
Thank
God
you.
God is works in mysterious ways, and he delivers to those who are hardworking, who are caring and compassionate, good human beings. Like I always say, you're one of the best human beings I've ever met, man. And I
Thank
don't
you.
know
I
how
really
any other
appreciate
way to
that.
put that.
Thank you so much. Right back at you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about. Actually, I want one more thing about Goldberg, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Is there one piece of advice when you started this journey? Because you train at Rhodes Wrestling Academy with such as so do I, and Dustin is also an amazing
Yep.
mentor.
Yep.
Is there one piece of advice that Goldberg had given you that you want to share, or that really just it's a tenet of your life now? You just wake up and that's always just there. You don't even have to think about it anymore.
He's given me a lot of advice, especially in wrestling in regards to things that I should try, advice from my first match, things that would be good for me in pursuit of increasing the success of my career, a lot of different things. I would say, honestly, though, there was a quote, and I'm going to slip on this because I don't spend too much time thinking about this, to be honest. But there was a quote that he had said during his Hall of Fame speech, where basically, and I'm butchering what he said, but he just basically simply put that, if you want to be great or if you want to accomplish something great, then you have to sacrifice and work your ass off for it. And he was alluding to everything that he did to make the comeback to be able to wrestle in front of Gage and his wife and everything. And just knowing the person behind those words and also seeing the genuineness behind those words as he said it, that's something where as soon as he said it, I remember screen recording it and posting it, because anytime I see that clip, like it's a humble reminder of achieving something that you really want to do at the end of the day is so simple, but the simplicity of achieving a goal as big as what I want, the simplicity behind it, there's so much time, effort, and energy that goes into that. So just because it's simple, such as sacrifice and work your ass off, there's no time frame to that. Generally
Right.
speaking, it's not very short. For me, it's how old am I again? 28.
Yeah.
To me, this all started. The first day I walked into martial arts when I was 3. The first day that I saw Goldberg wrestle, like that's when all of this started to me. So now, being 28, trying to get all of those core memories and experiences to mount to something. Yeah, it does take a lot of sacrifice and it does take a lot of hard work, and there is no particular time limit that coincides with any of that. Some individuals, they get their break early for whatever reason, and that's their path. And you can't sit there and just think to yourself, like, what the heck? I've been working this hard for this long and blah, 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 and whatever, because that's the easiest way to fall off track and lose sight of what actually matters in the pursuit of accomplishing your own dreams. So that's kind of off track, but in general, that's like probably his most powerful quote that I've ever heard him say was in his Hall of Fame speech, and just talking about how much sacrifice and how hard he had to work his ass off in order to make this comeback that he did.
Yeah. Do you read at all, as far as books or anything
Nope.
like that? Everybody has
No,
different
sir.
things, so
Yeah,
okay.
not at all. Not at
I,
all.
if I
Specifically
might,
because
go ahead.
I was going to say specifically because reading was something that basically I was kind of made to do when I was a kid, with the
Mm,
positive intent on making me smarter, learning more things, and all these different things, and it did do that. And to its credit, I actually naturally am a good reader and writer because of it, but also because of the experiences with reading in my childhood, I'm not as naturally inclined to want to read voluntarily, for sure.
yeah, I was gonna say. So I have a friend who I send pages from. I read this book right now called The Daily Stoic. I don't know if you've ever
Mhm.
seen it.
Mhm.
But I'll read something and then I'll text message it to him and be like, check this out. But I love this book, and this is good for people who don't have time to read a lot, because it's 1 page per day and it's written in a font type where it's, I would say, less than 200 words per page.
Okay.
But there are a lot of beautiful quotes and things such as, what you were just saying that has impacted you from Goldberg. And while you were saying that, it reminded me of something Marcus Aurelius had said about, don't put I'm going to butcher this as well, but basically the concept of it was, don't focus on things that don't matter, right?
Mhm.
If somebody else is ahead of you, keep working. It doesn't, they're where they're at, where they're supposed to be. Your path is where you're at and where you're going to be, as long as you
Right.
just keep doing it. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people see things that other people are doing and they don't believe that they have the value to deserve that. And so they don't put that work in. And, you and I both are chasing these impossible things and they're happening. Why? It's,
Mhm.
sure, maybe we're lucky, maybe well, I don't say maybe. I know we're all blessed by God, but maybe it's, those odds. are in our favor, but I'm willing to bet it's a lot of the hard work. It's a lot of the chasing, believing in yourself, just trying. What's the one thing that everybody says in fitness world? The hardest thing to do, show up, right?
Yeah.
So if you ever get a chance, and maybe I'll start harassing you with my text in the morning, like, bro, check this one out. Let's talk about. So I wanted to make this reference earlier because you were talking about Goldberg, and I was like, man, Jimmy and I, if we would have been friends, in middle school or something, we'd have been wrestling in the backyard because I'm a big
Yeah.
Scott Steiner fan, as you know.
Yeah.
And their feud between Goldberg and Scotty was I loved it. I thought it was a great story to tell. Two big jack dudes, both of them very athletic in other sports. So that I always think about that when we talk. I'm like, man, he's a Goldberg fan. I'm a Steiner fan, and I love watching Bronson wrestle now in the WWE. I don't know if you got a chance to check out any of his stuff, but you have another friend that is one of my favorites right now. And the funny story about this before we get into it, the way I came to know who Brian Cage even was, I was going through a bunch of Steiner clips on YouTube, old promos, and I came across Brian Cage cutting the if you say it's a Hurricane Ron one more time, I'm coming down to the booth. It's a Frankensteiner. Call it a Frankensteiner. And I was like, oh, this dude's awesome.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, and you want to share a little bit, how did you come to know and be friends with the machine, the Swolverine, Brian Cage?
Also CT.
CT's the man.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, CT 3 for 3 on this podcast. So yeah, basically Brian was friends with CT. I don't remember specifically how they met, but I know they did a lot of like YouTube content together. I know CT knows Gabby Tuft from that as well. I think she did that same video with Brian, if I'm not mistaken, when they all worked out together. And I think Brian also has CT as a mentor, like a mental kind of prep mentor as well, similar to Goldberg. And so when I started wrestling, CT had shared a video of me to announce that I was going to do one of his lifting events, I believe. And I think Brian liked it. I thought that was cool, so I like followed him. And then I also CT told me they had a brief conversation about me or whatever. And ever since that day, I've met up with Brian multiple different times to work out, to hang out, to drop him off at the airport, take him to AEW events. He's brought me backstage a handful of times, and he's actually become a big mentor actually for myself in wrestling. More hands on, on the wrestling stuff. One day when I was in Vegas, he took the time out of his day to work out with me, of course. But then afterwards, we went to a Vegas wrestling school to just basically work the ring a little bit, and he gave me a ton of great advice. He gave me one of my first feels of like a tenured professional wrestler. I remember body slamming him, and I was like, you don't feel like the 150-pound kids that like it was a cool experience. And he was actually going to try to make it out to my first match in Arizona too, even though he lives in Vegas and his schedule is obviously busy with AEW and everything. So he has really and very, very humble to say it, has become a pretty good friend of mine online and in person, and then has actually kind of fallen into the role of a really strong mentor of mine too, and the wrestling and everything. So yeah, it's been really cool to kind of build that relationship with Brian. We worked out here in Austin, we worked out in Vegas, Arizona, a bunch of different places. Just Brian. Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything bad to say about Brian at all. Nothing but good things. He's been a really cool person to be able to talk to at this particular stage of my journey, and being able to hang out around him and actually benefit from just seeing him live the life and talk the talk and walk the walk and do these different things. There's very few people that are as well respected as Brian in the industry. And so to be able to have easy access to him is something that's actually really, really cool.
Yeah. I love his his ring gear that he wears. When I don't know if you remember this. I think it was his last run. He's kind of out of the picture right now, right? He's got something going on, or I thought maybe I haven't seen him in a while, so that's why I say that. But his last run that he had there, he was wearing the King outfit from Tekken. I don't know if you play video games, but Tekken is
I
a
remember
fighter
that
game,
one.
kind of like, yeah. And King wears this lion head or a tiger head or something, and he has this cool outfit on. And so Brian's last gear was that character's gear. And I messaged on Instagram. I was like, check this out. Brian Cage got this King gear on from Tekken.
Yeah,
And he liked the post. And I kind of I
nice.
marked out a little bit. I'm like, Brian Cage liked my shit. He reposted it.
Yeah,
And I was like, oh, this is
that's funny.
awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hell yeah.
um, Cool. Let's talk about some more people that you are friends with or that you train. I know a big one that people would like to hear about. Ricky Starks, and you also
Yep.
train Dante as well, right?
Yeah, Dante, I've been training online even back when I was in Arizona. So coming up on 2 years, if not 2 years exactly, with Dante. And then Ricky, I've been training since October, I believe. So almost coming up on a year. It's flew by pretty fast. Dante is somebody that I've always had a ton of respect for. He's super soft spoken, super humble, super respectful, deserves everything that he has and will be getting in the wrestling industry for sure. Coming back from that injury that he suffered, taking that one bump
Yeah.
was just crazy to watch. I mean, like if anything, that clip should at least went more viral so he could benefit off of it because that was a crazy thing to see and to be
It's
able to kind of like talk to him through that process of recovery. Yeah.
it scared me when he did it again. I don't know if you saw that just
Oh, I didn't know
recently.
that.
Yeah, they did another
That's
ladder
insane.
match, and he hit it again, and I just
Really?
I did
Jesus.
one of these because I was like, oh no, that's terrible,
Yeah. Yeah. Wow,
man.
that's crazy. I didn't know that. And then with Ricky, it's interesting because Ricky was a recommendation from Dante, so I have Dante to thank for that. And it's funny with Ricky, you know, there's they talked about good wrestlers, and then the difference between that and like superstar,
Yeah.
and only so many people have like that superstar caliber to them. And Ricky is definitely one of those people for sure. And you obviously see it in his work if you're a big wrestling fan, but being able to like see him multiple times a week for almost a year now, you really start to understand why he's as well respected as he is and why my opinion of him like truly being a superstar is that of which it is because you see how his mind works and you see his particular mannerisms and you start to get an understanding of how his mind works and all these different things and you start to just kind of like yeah, it makes sense. Like it makes sense why he's good on the mic. It makes sense why he's good at talking shit. It makes sense why he's good at wrestling. It makes sense why blah 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 because like he is another example of he doesn't really change all that much for his wrestling persona. He just amplifies what like he is on a day to day life. Like it's funny when I watch him in interviews or watching promos with him before I knew him. I'm like, yep, that's Ricky. Yeah, like, yep, that's Ricky for sure. That's Ricky. He says something on the mic or he says something in an interview. I'm like, yeah, that's something he would say for sure. Yeah, and so and I think that's why he gets a lot of people to vibe with him because there's authenticity behind what he does. And so, with that being said, it's been cool to be a part of this particular chapter of his career because regardless of wherever he goes, you know, I know and have faith that he's going to end up in a place that's going to be able to allow him to show exactly what I'm talking about in regards to what I've seen since October of last year. His talent, his charisma, his personality, all of those different things that make him unique. That the reason why he gets the Rock comparisons, even though he hates them, all those different things that accumulate to those comparisons. That shit, if you're gonna get compared to anybody, I guess the Rock is not necessarily an insult, right? But to
That's
that,
a good one.
no, right? But to that point, though, he is very unique away from the Rock, and I think that I truly believe that he's going to get the opportunity to be able to show that and be able to truly reach even bigger heights in his career here in the near future.
Yeah. And you touched on something a second ago that I've been learning, trying to understand, trying to take it in, and then push it back out in my own career. And that's being a true, authentic use of yourself. That's how my coach puts it. And it took me a while to understand that because for me, wrestling's always been that larger than life. I've always been a theatrical fan, you know, uh, the Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, Macho
Mhm.
Man Randy Savage. And I don't know any of these people personally, so I can't
Yeah.
speak to who they are in real life. But you always see them on television and you just think it's just, it's over the top. It's really entertaining. It's just bigger than life, larger than life. And then you kind of think, well, I wonder what those people are like behind the curtain, you know? And I think now we're seeing it's been this way for a while, but I go in and out of being a wrestling watcher, or however you want to say that. Um, I would watch for a period of time and then I would kind of fall off and not watch it for a little bit. And then some big storyline happens, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, let me
Right.
check this out.
Yep.
Um, but it seems now a lot of these wrestlers, and like I said, I don't know anybody from the past, so I can't say,
Yeah.
but just the product that we're getting now seems it's a lot more who these people really are with a storyline instead of them on a daily basis. For
Yeah.
example, um, yeah, we'll just talk about Ricky Starks. You know, you're saying he's amplified, but it's something you could see him saying, right?
Hmm.
And I feel those promos are starting to really be a lot more powerful than when I first watched them because I was used to, oh, I'll tell you what, brother, I'm gonna lift the building up and throw it at you. And now
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
no, if you mess with me, I'm gonna hurt you. And that's a
Hmm.
lot more intimidating, you know, being a fighter, a trainer, the people who actually can do these things don't have to sell it to you. You can just see it in them. Oh, this guy
Right.
I shouldn't mess with, you know?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's where wrestling shifted is okay, we don't need to do the big, and it's still fun to watch, but it's more scary or
Hmm.
more relatable when it's more authentic, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I personally like it that way better. I mean, if for example, Ricky Starks, MJF, like I'm as a fan, I truly believe that Ricky Starks has beef with MJF and vice versa, right? Like the two individuals, the two human beings, they do not like each other. They have beef versus, you know, like a flying chicken and a scary umbrella going against each other, right? Just
Yeah.
like mystical things that are kind of funny to look at, but yet the realism is taken out of it. And to some degree, I think a touch of having something mystical or demonic to some degree. There's always those characters in wrestling. Is cool and good, but always I think always leaning towards the side of real is the best way to go about it nowadays, especially when the competitive landscape is a UFC where people are just enamored over fighting and MMA and jujitsu to some degree now. Boxing even has its fan base. So I think in order to keep wrestling growing, which it clearly has, you continue to force the person versus person element versus more fictional type storylines. And I think that's
Yeah.
just because of the times that we're in, rather than it just being a bad idea altogether. Because clearly, a point in the late '90s, early 2000s, that was a really big success, where the majority of the matches or storylines were based around that. But nowadays, it's much more believable to get almost lured into the same mindset as if you're watching UFC and then have to
Yeah.
remind yourself with a pinch that, oh yeah, this is pro wrestling, this is different, you know. But with
Yeah.
the promos and the characters being closer to who they are as human beings, it allows wrestling to continue to grow and evolve in today's landscape of entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about some more pro wrestling because that's what we love. What is something I'm going to pick your brain here now? What's your favorite professional wrestling match to watch or study or just enjoy of all time? What's your favorite match?
Yeah, so just I think my two favorite Goldberg matches, because that's what you actually asked, are so it's funny because I don't clearly remember a lot of his WCW run because I was so young and I didn't have much of a gauge of what the other characters meant. I just knew that he would always beat up bad guys. So whether
Yeah.
it was Hulk Hogan or some jobber, I didn't really know the difference at the time. I just knew that he always beat up bad guys because I thought it was real. So they just kept throwing bad guys at him, you know. But then his first run with WWE, I really loved the Rock match, and I these matches they're my favorite because of what they signify in my life or what they mean to my childhood, as opposed to how good the match literally was in the eyes of your average critic or fantasy booker, right? I
Sure.
really love the match with The Rock. I really love the first initial promo with it. They're like, oh, he only said 3 words. I'm like, that's all he has to say. He's Goldberg. Like
Yeah.
that's all he needs to do, you know? I actually genuinely think that was a pretty solid match. Obviously, The Rock was a great opponent for Goldberg at that time, not only to put him over, but to help carry him through. I also believe that one of my favorite ones was him at Survivor Series in 2003 when he was selling that broken leg from from Batista attacking it to get on Evolution, and
Yeah.
he was defending the world title. And I was like, as a fan as a kid, I was certain that they were going to find a way to make him lose and cheat him out of the title. But then that was one of my favorite matches because they actually proved me wrong, and he got through all Evolution in that match and still won with a broken leg, and that was a perfect depiction of exactly what I pictured Goldberg being, was just being this heroic, invincible force that is able just to break through countless bad guys. And so that was a great match to watch. As far as his more recent runs, I love the first Brock match because not only was him coming back when I never thought that he would, but also the pop that even me as a Goldberg mark got from him squashing Brock was just one of the coolest things I've ever really seen. And like they did that so well. Like it's like it that was the most famous squash match like of all time. Like in my opinion, like as far as like reception from the fans and everything, like it was that was probably one of my favorite matches too, just because of like how it emotionally made me react, you know. and
Yeah.
and to me, you could pick matches that are technically good, that have really good storylines, that have wrestlers that are quote better wrestlers. But as far as like what matches meant the most to me, those are definitely some of the most impactful ones for sure. And then going back to watch him beat Hogan for the title is an iconic one, most definitely. Especially seeing the WCW fan base at the time react to that, and then like coming to realization that like damn, like wrestling was crazy back then. Like the way the
Yeah.
fans were, like at WCW, for example, for that, like it just looks like hordes of people. It looks like they don't even have seats and they're just going crazy. And wrestling is never really going to be like that anymore, which is not a bad thing. But it was such a unique time in wrestling, and
Hmm.
Goldberg was like one of the center figures in all of that. So
Yeah. The Monday Night Wars are. I mean, we don't need to church it up because it is what it is. Everybody that's ever watched wrestling knows how powerful
yeah.
an era that was. But for me, and that's why I really enjoy AEW now. And now we have a lot of other wrestling promotions coming up because I missed for a while watching Raw. And if there wasn't something that was really bringing me in, I could change the channel and watch something else. And if something wasn't bringing me in there, I could switch over. And we
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
have that for a long time. But now
Hmm.
you have wrestling almost every night of the week. And it's if you're a wrestling mark, it's the
Yeah.
best time to watch wrestling,
Right. Yep. Yep.
Okay, let's talk about what is a I mean, obviously you're training, so you probably are working on these things, and if you don't want to give it away, that's fine. What is the wrestling move that you want to do? Like what is your one move that you haven't done now, but that you want to be your move? It doesn't have to be your finisher, but what's something, every great wrestler has their finishers, but they have that one iconic moment where they do this move and it just pops the crowd. And what is that for you?
Currently, right now, this is not my move whatsoever. But ever since Dustin suggested that I do the jackhammer and Goldberg gave me the approval to do it, I definitely want to hit jackhammers in matches, and at the very least, be able to hit on somebody that's predominantly bigger than me to have that same type of feeling and effect, right? And that's my current answer, and I expect that answer to evolve and change as I continue to get deeper and deeper into my character. There's definitely moves that I want to hit, but as far as like a move that I really want to hit, I just want to hit a jackhammer, even if it's like once in an indie match, just to like have that be just to pay homage essentially to
Sure.
the person that got me. And of course, I hit the spear for that reason, right? And I do various things in the matches that also are similar to Goldberg in regards to my intensity and so on and so forth. But yeah, the jackhammer is kind of like the icing on the cake to me, or the cherry on top, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I approached it kind of the same way, my two biggest influences, if I had to choose the two biggest influences, because there's so many wrestlers that
Mhm.
I like to watch or that I mimicked as I was growing up, but the two in ring guys were Scott Steiner, Big Papa Pump, and Bret the Hitman Hart. And so I really was trying to find moves that they did, that I felt were those moments for me as a kid watching. Like, what move did they hit that was you're just like, oh, they're gonna do something at this moment. They create that magic. And I ended up choosing, as you saw, the Steiner recliner for my
Mhm.
finish. A lot easier to apply than I thought, but
That's awesome.
it's a cool move and it looked cool. And everybody told me, "Hey, you sold that perfect. Your facial expressions were great." So I'm glad I was able to do it some justice.
Yeah.
Um, well, we're talking about things that we want to accomplish. So, what is your dream match? Who or what, where, what promotion? What's your dream match? Set us up. Take us through that in your head. Who would, for you, I should clarify, who do you
Yeah.
want to face, and then set that stage for us? What's that look like?
I think, and this is so far fetched because of timing, because of where people are at in the matter, and my injury isn't helping at all. But as far as like dream matches go, it's not that, and this is also ironic because as a kid, I would have never thought of saying this out of loyalty because as a kid, one quick story is they had WCW had released these like stuffed action figures that were much bigger than your normal action figures. So they had stuffing in it, and if you hit them, they made a noise. They had a
Mm-hmm.
DDP one, and they had a Goldberg one, and they were built to actually like wrestle and hit. And so when we're at the store, I literally stood in front of a Goldberg one, right, one of the few, and then the DDP one, and then my dumbass at the time was like, "No, I can't get the Goldberg one. I can't hit him. Like I can't wrestle him." So then I got the DDP one because like I couldn't like hit Goldberg, but yet now being an adult, I'm like, "You dumbass! You just should have got the Goldberg memorabilia. You have like 10 action figures." But so now to answer your question, a dream match to me would be like the conclusion of the story in regards to like being able to have the honor of going against my lifelong hero and mentor and everything else, like all that footage, right? From the
Mm-hmm.
first time I met him to the SmackDown event, like I believe that all that footage will be used on a wrestling platform for something. But it would also be very cool if timing aligned better, and there was a teacher versus student type moment for sure. I wouldn't even care if it was a squash match, right? I told
Yeah.
somebody the other day, I was like, if I was an extra on Raw and I was like a security guard that got fucking flung by Goldberg, uh, that would be yet another just dream come true. It would just I wouldn't care if I got squashed. It just doesn't matter. But as far as dream matches go, that would be just something that I could have never ever thought possible. For it to happen would be the coolest thing ever, for sure.
Where are
Squash
we
or
at?
not.
What
Um, Arizona,
what
WrestleMania,
promotion?
WWE.
All right. I'm testing your creative acting juices here. So we got WWE Arizona. What show? SmackDown, SummerSlam, WrestleMania, Survivor Series, Packed House,
WrestleMania,
obviously. WrestleMania.
WrestleMania.
All right. So that's and
Yeah,
okay. Who's going over?
I'm gonna put Goldberg over because
You're gonna put him
I can't
over?
beat him.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good
yeah,
answer. You might say you're next.
yeah.
All right. Well, let's I think we've ran through a lot of your time today and I really appreciate it. So
Phenomenal.
I would love to do this again, maybe in
Oh
person.
yeah,
I wanted to
yeah,
do that for this first one, but I just couldn't figure out the logistics of it.
yeah. No
And
worries.
I kind of living by this motto right now of just pull the trigger
Yeah,
and
yeah,
stop
totally.
trying to have the perfect moment.
Hmm.
So we'll definitely do this again sometime when you're available and when our schedules
Oh yeah,
match up. I got a lot of things that I'm doing right now as well. Um, so let's take this time to shout out anybody that you didn't get to mention earlier or that you thought of. Pitch, what you got going on next, your business stuff, and what's the future for Jimmy House and how strong.
yeah. So I gave a lot of shout outs to everybody that I think means the most to me. All my supporters that are here in Austin and Arizona, they really carry me through. My parents, my girlfriend, my best friends and business partners, all the friends that I made out here, and all the people that continue to support and build my goals and vision online. That those are all very important people to me. Special shout outs RGA Austin, Henzo Gracie Austin is a huge supporter of my business. In particular to this injury, I have to shout out Waste to Well in Austin. Brigham is a client of mine, the owner of Waste to Well, and he's been instrumental in helping support me through this rehab process. And I can't thank him enough for helping me get back to pursuing my dreams and goals and purpose and everything. That's somebody that is one of the most successful yet selfless people I've ever met. And it's crazy to see somebody on his level of success be able to be human and have compassion and have empathy for others and just be like just a really good friend, even though he doesn't anybody anything. He doesn't have to, right? He's just been such a pleasure to work with in person, but also it's been an honor to call him a friend and just extremely blessed and privileged to be able to benefit from the great services that Waste to Well provides. So I definitely want to give a shout out to them. I look forward to being able to get to work with them for a long time moving forward. I mean, CM Punk was just in there. Rey Mysterio goes to them, right? A lot of famous UFC fighters, jiu-jitsu athletes, like they are the who's who of what they do. And to be able to use stem cells and try to expedite this knee rehab process that was originally told to me 6 months, right? And I'm on month 2 right now. So they've helped me get back to what I meant to do a lot sooner. So that's just a very obvious one that I have to do for sure. And
Yeah,
then
absolutely. They helped me a lot,
great,
when I tore my triceps. So I definitely agree with you there.
good,
Wonderful shout out for that.
good. I'm glad. And they're obviously local to Austin, but people obviously fly out for their services. And if you're one of those people that could use help in with what they provide, I would definitely recommend the trip to come out to see them. Because you'll get the best service you ever got, regardless of state, and it's worth the trip out to get treated by the best in the business, as opposed to settling for less if you're not close by. So if I knew about them in Arizona, I had the same issue, I would 100% be willing to come out to Austin to try to, again, get myself through this injury process. So I suggest that for anybody. I mean, I know tons of celebrities and athletes and professional wrestlers will fly from wherever to go specifically to Ways to Well because they know Brigham's the man. Joe Rogan obviously uses them, right? And they know that they're going to be taken care of well there. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about them.
If you would like more information on Ways to Well and how they can help you live in peak health, click the link down below and visit them today. Ways to Well pairs powerful blood work analysis with expert care and personalized protocols to help you achieve that peak health. Click the link down below.
And then outside of that, anybody that's listening that's interested in coaching, I provide both virtual, online, and in person. Obviously, the in person is here in Austin, Texas. So, as far as people that are looking to get in the best shape, most pain free version of themselves possible, I would like to be the coach to help you achieve those goals. And as far as anything else goes, you can find me on Instagram at Coach Jimmy House. I have my YouTube channel at Jimmy House. And as far as what's next, it's take my coaching business to new levels. It's get back to the ring. It's start to really get closer and closer and check each kid off leading toward that first million and continue to fully see out what potential God has in store for me.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. I do want to comment because you're just doing the pitch there for the business. And I've told you this in person. I want to thank you so much because I genuinely believe you put years back on my life when you corrected a lot of things I was doing wrong and creating the program that you did for me. And I can attest 100% what you said in this podcast. You will work with the talents, you will work with your customers. And if I have something going on that day, hey coach, this is bothering me, can we work around it? Is there something else I can do? And you're always providing that. So I appreciate the audible calls when you need to make them. And I definitely recommend anybody looking to do any physical, even if it's however old you are or whatever your goals are, you don't have to be a professional athlete to work with Coach House. He will take care of you. He'll get you to your goals. Not everybody wants to bench press, 500-600 pounds. Not everybody wants to be a professional athlete, but I think we all agree everyone wants to be healthy. So reach out to Coach House for those health goals. And Jimmy, I appreciate your time, brother. You got anything else you want to say?
No, just thank you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to, of course, be the first guest in your podcast. Of course, you know that I have a ton of respect for you. And I've always felt that since day one, we've clicked very well. And I think it has to do a lot with how you carry yourself as a person and how passionate you are about your individual goals. And a lot of those goals align with mine, but some of them outside of mine as well. But I can even look at your goals from an outside perspective and just have a ton of respect and admiration for it because I understand that you have a ton of different things going on outside of that, your job, your marriage, all these various things that obviously will carry a part of your day, but yet you still find time to do a podcast, to build your brand, to take the acting lessons, to do the wrestling, to do the training. So you're a very prime example of somebody that does not make excuses. And if you are able to signify what your particular goal is, you are very relentless in your pursuit to get there, and you don't use your circumstances as a reason as to why you can't achieve it. And so that's something that we can all learn from. And I hope that whatever listeners that we have right now and the listeners that you're going to gain in the future, they continue to be able to learn from your example and be able to better their lives because of it.
Brother, I appreciate that. That's one of the nicest things anyone's ever said about me.
Thank you.
I appreciate
your
that
wife,
so
I'm sorry.
much. What's that?
I said,
Oh yeah.
your wife, I'm sorry.
I get a lot of nice things, but it's equally the opposite way too. Well, brother, I appreciate your time, man. Like I said, and I definitely want to do this again in person. Maybe we'll play some chess next time or something.
Hell yeah.
But Jimmy House, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for your time and watching this today.